So how do homeschoolers socialize? What do we even do? Don't we just sit in our homes all day long and do our schoolwork? Whenever people talk about homeschooling, the one thing that almost always comes up is the S word, socialization. But which is really better, homeschool or public school for this socialization? Hi, I'm Jess from the blog siloandsage.com, and I am a former elementary teacher, and now I'm a homeschool mom of 5 and have been for over a decade. And so I've seen kind of the good and the bad of both sides of the coin. And which is really better? Which is better for your kids for this socialization? Now, if you ask most homeschoolers, they will tell you they hate this word socialization, because let's think about it. The way we think about socialization, it doesn't happen anywhere outside of a traditional school setting. After you become an adult and move on into your real life, and even in many other cultures, this isn't how socialization works. It's really something we've created for ourselves. For generations, kids grew up surrounded by their family. Grandkids worked alongside grandparents. We would have cousins living next to one another and playing together, kids of all ages. It's not the way things were for years and years and years and years. It's really something that's fairly new and has really just been created out of necessity because of the way work has changed in our world. It really has been fairly recent that most families, both parents went off to work and needed a place for their child to go during the day. And that's really where our educational system came from. The need for kids to go somewhere during the day for them to be taken care of. It's become normal for our kids to go off to school so that they can be taken care of and educated all day long, where this used to be something that was the responsibility of the family. The mom usually, or grandparent, this was the responsibility of the family together to educate their kids and to teach them not only academics, but to teach them life skills, to teach them how to bake and farm and build and do all of these things that now a lot of these skills have kind of fallen off the wayside and are considered less important. But this socialization hasn't really been the norm until pretty recently. And when you think about what this socialization looks like, so you take 25 to 30 kids that are all about the same age and you put them in a classroom together and you expect them to all be moving at relatively the same pace, and we call that socialization. But when I was a classroom teacher, there really was not that much socialization that happened in a classroom. If you were in school or you've ever sent your kids to school, you know that they probably got in trouble for talking to their neighbor, right? Talking to their friend who sits next to them. There was probably most of the time during the day that they're supposed to be sitting in their desk and quiet. They have very limited amounts of playtime. Maybe they have a short recess or a lunch period. Some schools, kids aren't even allowed to talk during lunch. There was a school that I did like a practicum in when I was learning, when I was a student and practicing to be a teacher. And the kids were not allowed at all to talk during lunch. And it was a classroom management thing. Much of education is designed to manage a large group of kids at the same time. And it's understandable, right? If you have 25 to 30 kids that are all talking at the same time, loud and excited as kids tend to get, it could be chaos. So there needs to be a level of classroom management that allows for the teacher to actually talk, right? And for kids to actually listen and learn. That's just necessary in a classroom situation. But there really isn't any other time in life when kids are going to be put in a room with 25 to 30 other kids that are all the same age and all relatively the same level, which if you think about it actually in a classroom, all kids are not actually on the same level, which is one of the big downfalls of public education, that we move kids along at the same pace when they really are not working at the same strength level or at the same ability level. But that's another video. But homeschoolers have the ability to socialize and to interact with kids and adults of all ages. So my kids, they don't just hang out with, like my 10-year-old doesn't just go and hang out with other 10-year-olds. He hangs out with 5-year-olds, 12-year-olds, 15-year-olds, and adults all at the same time. And he learns how to interact with kids and adults of multiple levels, multiple abilities, multiple interests, multiple ages. It isn't just you look like me and you are doing the same things that I am doing, and so that's how we relate to one another. It actually is more like real life. So how do homeschoolers socialize? What do we even do? Don't we just sit in our homes all day long and do our schoolwork? Well, no, we don't. Because in a public school classroom, the amount of time that your child is actually doing schoolwork, being educated, is much less than their actual school day. The school day is really designed to be kind of like a daycare. Now, I don't mean that in an insulting way to teachers, because I have been a teacher. I understand how hard it is, and I understand what it takes to be a teacher. And so please do not misunderstand me. But the amount of education that's actually happening in the entire school day, you could break it down and it would be much, much less. It would be only a few hours versus an entire school day. Teachers spend a lot of their day managing classroom issues, discipline, shuffling kids from one place to another, organizing the situation, getting kids ready to do something, getting kids ready to move on, or working with small groups of kids while maybe another group of kids is messing around or doing their own thing or just reading on their own. The amount of actual instruction tends to be very small compared to the whole entire day. But kids have to be gone the entire day. They have to be in school the entire day because their parents are at work the entire day. That's really how our educational system is designed, for our parents to go to work all day long and their kids to have someplace to go all day long. Now, I'm not saying that if you send your kids to school that you are bad or you are wrong or you aren't doing a good job, because that is not true at all. Not everyone will choose to homeschool, and that's okay. And the teachers that are doing the work, there are so many good teachers that are doing really good things. But there are some downfalls to public education. And are there some downfalls to homeschool? Probably. In my opinion, the downfalls to public education outweigh the downfalls to homeschool, which is why we have continued to homeschool this whole time. But just because this is a good fit for my family does not mean that it has to be a good fit for yours. So let's talk about how my kids socialize. What do we even do? So our actual instructional time is a very small amount of our day. So the amount of time that it takes my boys to do their math lessons or their reading or writing or whatever it is that we're doing, if we're doing a history lesson, we're doing read alouds, a unit study, whatever it is that we're doing, is a very small amount of our day because they've learned to be more independent. So they can go off and read on their own. They're doing writing activities on their own. They go out in the yard and they build things together. There are a lot of things that they do throughout the day that are very educational, but would not have happened if they were in the classroom. So just the structure of our day looks very different from how it looks in a public school setting. So the way we socialize is obviously going to look a lot different too. Now, we socialize, of course, with each other. I have 5 kids. We are constantly socializing. We literally can not do anything in our day, it feels like, without socializing with each other. It's hard to get away from each other in a large family. So we have a lot of times for interacting with each other. My kids are with me all day. They're interacting with me. My husband works from home, so he's constantly in and out of what we are doing in our home. They're interacting with each other. So my 14-year-old gets to hang out with his 5-year-old brother during the day. He gets to play with all of his younger siblings, and the same goes the other way. My 5-year-old gets to play with his 12-year-old brother and his 14-year-old brother during the day. So there's a different kind of interaction that gets to happen during our day. Now, of course, you don't have to have a large family to homeschool. You could have one child, you could have two children, and there's so many, many ways that you can socialize your kids. Now, I keep saying this word socialize. It's not really a word that I ever use in my day-to-day life because it's just life. When we go out to the park and we meet some friends at the park, we don't say we're going to socialize, right? We just say we're going to the park to play and to see our friends. And that's just how we live our life. And that's exactly how we socialize our kids. We just live our life. So some things that my kids do now or have done in the past. My kids are on sports teams. They do track and cross country and basketball. There's a lot of socialization that happens on a sports team. And there's a lot of skills that they learn for interacting with other kids and working together as a team. Our track and cross country teams are very unique. It is a homeschool team. So we have kids from high school age all the way down to even second and third grade that are on this team together. So the way that they get to interact with each other is really unique. And, you know, my 14-year-old son, he finishes a practice or he finishes a meet, and high school kids will, you know, a high school senior will come along and fist bump him and tell him that he did a good job and congratulate him on a win or, you know, a personal record or whatever the case may be. And that's not something that would happen in all situations. We have third grade kids running alongside eighth grade kids, and they get to be a team together and they get to learn from one another. You see older kids encouraging younger kids looking up to the older kids and learning from them and watching them and having something to aspire to. And it's a really, really beautiful experience, actually, and especially for my kids because I have 4 out of my 5 kids that are all on the same track and cross country team, which is very unique. And they've even gotten to do some cool things like do a relay with 4 brothers who are all different ages. Now, they knew that they weren't going to win the relay because this was last year and we had a 2nd grader alongside a 7th grader doing a relay together. Obviously, they're not going to win when you have a team that maybe is all 6th and 7th graders, but it was just such a fun experience for them, and it's something that they've talked about ever since. It's been almost a year, and they have had so much fun with it. And that isn't something that they would really get to experience in a traditional sports team setting. But this isn't the only way that my kids socialize. They're not just doing sports, they're going to church. We're doing hiking with our hiking group. We go on field trips. We go to the nature center and take classes. We have done co-ops in the past. We're not currently in a co-op, but we have done them in the past. And the co-ops generally have kids of different age levels and different age ranges doing some classes and groups together. So they get to interact with other adults. They get to see other moms who are on our hikes or at track or in the co-op when we were in a co-op or on these field trips, and they get to interact with them and learn from them in the same way that they're learning from me or the same way that they would learn from a teacher in a public school. My kids have really benefited from being able to interact with all different kids. I've noticed there is a big difference between public school kids and homeschool kids when they get together in groups. When public school kids tend to get together in groups, they gravitate toward girls who are of the same age as them. Boys gravitate toward boys who are of the same age as them. Now, does that happen some with homeschool kids? Of course. But homeschool kids are much more likely to play as a large group with all kids and tend to not leave other kids out. Now, I'm not saying this is the case for all public school kids, so please don't leave me hate comments telling me that I think that all homeschool kids are kind and all public school kids are mean, because that is absolutely not true. Because I know some public school kids who are very kind and very inclusive of all children, but I have noticed a trend that homeschool kids tend to be a little bit more inclusive of kids of all ages and abilities because that's just what they're used to. They're used to playing with another family. They don't just go all the time and have a play date with one other child. They have a play date with the entire family. So when I take my kids to a play date or a birthday party or an activity, I generally take all of my kids together, from my 14-year-old down to my 5-year-old. We all go together, we all play at the park together with our friends, and sometimes there isn't a child for each of my kids that kind of matches up their age, but that's okay. They still play and they have fun. We often go hiking or to the park with some friends of ours who have the same age kids as my two youngest kids, but my older kids are still there and they're still having a lot of fun. And that's just how life is after you move on from school. When you graduate from high school and you move on to college, you don't just go to college and only hang out with freshmen. Now, of course, there are some freshman activities and there's some classes and maybe you lived in a freshman dorm. But when I was in school, I had friends who, when I was in college, I had friends who were freshmen, sophomore, senior. You know, we all hung out together. There certainly are some things that you have a little bit more in common, maybe with a freshman, because you can relate to, hey, this is our first year in school. We've both never done this before. We're living away from home, and a senior is about ready to graduate. So they're having a slightly different experience. But when you go into college or you go into the workforce, you aren't just hanging out with people your own age. You aren't just in a room with kids who are 7. We're not just in a room with all kids who are 7 and 8 years old. When you go to college, you might have a 30-year-old in your class next to you. I had lots of classes when I was in college that there were adults who were married, had previous careers, and they were sitting in classes next to me, and we were interacting and we were doing projects together, and this was normal. This is how normal life is when you go out and get a job. When you go out and get a job, you aren't just hanging out and working with other 18 or 19-year-olds when you get your first job. When I was a teacher for the first year I was teaching, my co-teachers, one of them was in his 50s and the other one was in her 60s. And I was fresh out of college in my 20s. So we only see this experience with kids interacting with kids their other ages only in the public school setting. So the reality is that when you homeschool your kids and you get the chance to experience life every day with kids of other ages and adults and all these different types of kids and types of situations, you're actually living a little bit more closely to real life. So when we say that homeschool kids are not socialized, I hope that you can see that that is really not true. Now, could a homeschool kid not be socialized? Yeah, a homeschool kid could sit at home all day long if that's what their parent was doing. If you are virtual schooling your kids and maybe you aren't getting out and interacting with the community, sure, maybe your kid won't be socialized. But that could be true also of a public school child. I had plenty of kids in my own classroom or when I was a kid even who they just were kind of odd, right? They didn't really like to interact with other kids. Maybe they were very introverted and they just didn't like to hang out with other kids. They were kind of on their own. But that happens whether or not you are in public school or homeschool. People are going to have different personalities. I know plenty of weird kids who graduated from school and continued to be weird adults. So just because your child or another child is homeschooled doesn't mean they will be weird or unsocialized. It really has to do with personality, family dynamics. What you put into it is what you will get out of it. There are some other things that happen within the public school that you just don't really see in real life. Things like when you are in a public school, kids have to ask permission to go to the bathroom, right? Because that teacher is responsible for these kids. She or he has to know where they are at all times. They can't send 20 kids to the bathroom at the same time and have them all wandering the halls together. So they have to have a level of classroom management that says you have to have permission to leave the room. You have to have permission to eat your snack. You have to have permission to go outside. My kids don't have to do that. They can go to the bathroom whenever they want. They can eat a snack for the most part whenever they want. They can go outside usually whenever they want. They have a level of freedom that we see in adulthood. They learn to be a little bit more independent than they would in a classroom setting. Now, this doesn't mean that one is wrong or one is right. It's just the nature of how things are. Now, in my opinion, the way we do homeschool just sets kids up for real life in a little bit better way, because when you go off to your job, you have to have an element of self-discipline. You have to have some independence. You have to be a go-getter. You have to be able to make your own decisions for yourself and not always waiting for someone to tell you what to do. And that's what we do in our homeschool. We teach our kids to be self-starters. We want them to be independent. They don't need to ask permission for everything, and they do get to kind of make some of their own decisions. So in my opinion, that is a huge advantage of homeschooling. We expect our education to prepare us for real life, right? We expect it to prepare our kids for real life. And this type of situation in a school where you have to ask permission to leave the room, ask permission to eat, ask permission to go to the bathroom, it isn't really real life preparation. It is preparation maybe for a specific type of job where you have someone telling you what to do all the time, but that isn't necessarily what I want for my kids. I don't want them to go into a job expecting to be told what to do. I want them to learn independence. I want them to be a self-starter. I want them to go out on their own and be able to move into a management position because they understand what that is like to have independence and have autonomy over your day. So in my opinion, that is a huge advantage of homeschooling for sure. Now, the other thing that I love about homeschooling that I think is something that a lot of people overlook, and if you have only one child, maybe this doesn't apply to you and your particular situation, but with my family being larger and having 5 kids, I want my kids to have really good relationships with each other. That is actually a big reason that we homeschool. I want my kids to have really good relationships with each other and with myself and with my husband. I want to have a close-knit family. I want my kids to be best friends. I'm okay with them not having best friends outside of our family. Now, they have friends, of course, outside of our family, and they have good friends, but I'm okay if their best friends are each other. I actually would prefer it that way because friends come and go. School classmates come and go. Teammates come and go. I still have friends from when I was young. I still have friends from college. I have friends from my church. I have friends from different activities and things that I've done. But I would love if my kids' best friends are within their family. Because I have been really blessed to have close relationships with my siblings. My husband has really close relationships with his siblings. I have great relationships with my sisters-in-law, and I want that for my kids. I want them to value family relationships so much that they call their brothers when they have a problem. That when they have something amazing happening in their life, their brothers are their first call. That when they get married, their brothers stand up with them. I want those relationships to be super strong and so close that they're each other's best friends. And I don't feel bad about that at all. I think that is a great thing that they can have each other for the rest of their lives, because that is the truth, that their family is going to be there when friends fall away and friends get, they get into an argument or they lose touch with each other and they are no longer close to each other. They move away. That is going to happen in their life, but even if they move away from their family, they're still going to be family. So for me, that is a huge advantage of homeschooling, that socialization piece. It doesn't look the same as socialization in the classroom, for sure. But I'm okay with that because I actually think, in my opinion, that this is better. That these are relationships that are going to stand the test of time. These are relationships that are going to stick with them forever. And I want these to be their closest relationships. So when it comes down to it, which do I think is better? Well, if you ask me, I actually think that homeschool is better. Maybe I'm biased, but I have seen both sides of the coin. And this is the way of life and the kind of socialization that I want for my kids. This is what I think is the better way of doing our life. and the better situation for our family and the better way for my kids to be socialized. And you can have a different opinion. That's okay. And if you do, you can leave it in the comments in a nice way, I hope. And it's all right if you disagree with me, but this for sure is how I see it. And having seen both situations and having been in the classroom and in the homeschool, I think that this is the way to go. If you haven't already, hit the like button, subscribe to my channel so you never miss another homestead, homeschool, or handmade video. And I will see you in the next video. In the meantime, keep cultivating your home.